Back here on HQ, going over the biggest needs for teams as we inch closer to the draft. Right now, taking a look at the division where we find our Super Bowl champs, the Eagles, the NFC East, your division as well. Haley.
I had to hold back a boo there, and that's growth.
Yeah, Giants have the highest draft pick, sitting at 3 overall. Cowboys not too far, sister, behind at 12 after they finished just 7-10 last year. Commanders looking to build off of that Cinderella season at 29, and the Eagles trying to shore up an already stout roster with the NFL pick in the first round. And, of course, we got to welcome back in the fellas here, Bryant McFadden and Tyler Sullivan. Biggest needs for each team in the NFC East when it comes to the draft. Giants at number 3. Look, it's no secret that they need a quarterback, all right? But they need a whole lot more there, right, B-Mac? So where did the Giants put their focus? Is it quarterback? Is it playmakers? Is it everybody?
Quarterback, 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 quarterback. Plain and simple.
Okay.
Plain and simple. Draft your young quarterback and build around him. Great job in selecting Malik Neighbors in the first round a year ago. But go get him a proven quarterback that he can build a relationship with, and the same can be said for the entire offense. They've been struggling. The entire Daniel Jones saga was not good, and clearly he's no longer a part of their organization. Got released a year ago, so trying to find that young quarterback is the way to go for me with the New York Giants.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other option, right? It has to be a quarterback for the New York Giants. I mean, like, you saw what happened this past season, and they just had zero quarterback play, and it's part of the reason why they're picking number 3 overall at this draft this spring. My concern is, and it was similar to what we were talking about with the New York Jets, my concern is where are they going to be able to find this quarterback? Because it sounds great. Okay, you have number 3. Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward will certainly be there for you, right? Well, I still have my doubts. I know that Tennessee has been showing you that they might not take a quarterback. Same thing with the Cleveland Browns. Like, they might take Abdul Carter to help replace Myles Garrett if they decide to move off of him. You can make the cases for all that. But at the end of the day, I look at both of those rosters. I look at Tennessee's roster. I look at Cleveland's roster. Will Levis is not a starting caliber NFL quarterback. We have no idea if Deshaun Watson will even play quarterback again after suffering another Achilles tear. So to me, those teams clearly have a need at quarterback that, of course, they potentially could fill in free agency or trade, but more likely than not, they might draft Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And if you're the New York Giants, you're sitting there going, oh boy, I mean, yeah, it's great to have Travis Hunter into the fold, but still. So to me, I would be aggressive, call up Tennessee, see what you could potentially do to get up to number 1 to secure yourself a quarterback at the NFL draft.
Yeah, there's, to our point, we've kind of been talking about this all day, there's just not that many options. Maybe giving Daniel Jones a call back and just saying, like, hey. No, I'm just kidding. I hope they do not do that. Let's talk about my Cowboys, gentlemen, because we know that it is an experience anytime America's team is in the spotlight. We also know that Jerry Jones and that all-in narrative last year was complete BS. So if we pivot to 2025, I know Ryan Wilson's been so high on Ashton Genty being in Dallas, Tyler. I also like that idea. But with Zach Martin retiring, someone's got to protect Dak, right? So where do you go when it comes to what the Cowboys need?
Yeah, you can certainly go with the offensive line, but to me, it just seems so obvious, right? Like, it should be Ashton Genty. It seems like that is such a clear and obvious pick that they attack the running back position, but specifically go after Genty with that first-round pick, because we've seen, I think this past year's a great example of, if you have an elite running back, it does change how opposing defenses attack you and how much easier life is. And I think that Genty is in that conversation of maybe not right away in year 1, but certainly throughout his career has the capabilities and the sheer talent to be one of the top running backs in the entire NFL. And we're looking at a Dallas Cowboys team, and you know this, Haley. I mean, they were absolutely awful at running the football last year. Bottom 10 in the NFL rushing, bottom 3 in yards per attempt. They couldn't do anything. So, you know, you kind of mask it. Okay, well, Cooper Rush was in there for most of the year. Dak got hurt. It didn't matter. You know, we could have been under center. They still wouldn't have been able to run the football. It just seemed like an absolute Achilles heel for this team. So again, attacking the running back position with Genty in the first round seems to make the most sense to me.
What makes running backs have elite-like seasons? Elite protection. Saquon Barkley was already a made man, but when he got behind that offensive line in Philly, we saw a Saquon Barkley we've never seen before. And that is the mindset for me with the Dallas Cowboys picking at 12. I love the idea of Ashton Genty wearing that star on his helmet. But when you look at how deep this running back class is, you can go get you a high-value guy in the second or third round and get sound production. But one thing we know about Jerry Jones, he does not mind utilizing first-round picks on offensive line play. And that's where I'm going. Offensive line, Josh Simmons from Ohio State, outstanding tackle. He's a guy that's not just a one-trick pony. In pass pro, dominating. Run pro, dominating. And then if you draft him, you can potentially move Tyler Guyton to the right side. So now you have two bookend tackles to protect your franchise quarterback and Dak Prescott, two bookend tackles to pave running lanes for whoever it is Dak Prescott will be handing the football to. And I think that improves the offense faster when you look at having a sound offensive line to work from, because I can care less about the wide receivers, the tight ends, and the running back. If you don't have sound offensive line production, good luck in seeing numbers coming from those guys.
I agree with everything that they're saying. What do you think for your team you need more, running back or O-line?
We need an O-line. I love Rico Dowdle. I have been on Rico Dowdle's fan group for quite some time now, so I'm so glad that he had the big breakout year. But to B-Mac's point, like, Dak is always hurt. We need an offensive line. Zach Martin has been a staple for 10 years on that O-line. Give me offensive linemen in Dallas, please, Jerry.
Please, Jerry, we're pleading with you here on HQ. All right, fellas, how about the Commanders? Magical season, right, for them. Jaden Daniels, Rookie of the Year, and then some. But he was the one who carried this team to the NFC title game, and their shortcomings were really put on display. What needs do the Commanders need to focus on coming up on this next draft night? We'll start with you, Sully.
Yeah, I think it's another pass catcher for Jaden Daniels. You can make the case for offensive line. You make the case to continue to bolster the defense. I believe they'll do that with the ton of cap space that they have. I think currently they have like the third most cap space, and that's not even accounting for when they move off of Jonathan Allen. So they're going to have capabilities to bolster the roster, you know, in any which way they want in free agency. But to me, I think that they need another pass catcher. Terry McLaurin's unbelievable, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. But you know who was number 2 in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns for the Commanders last year? It was Zach Ertz, who's currently a free agent and at the twilight of his career. So to me, you still need someone there for Jaden Daniels to grow and develop with. To me, I don't know if he'll still be there, but if somehow they could get Tyler Warren out of Penn State to replace the shoes of Zach Ertz at that tight end spot, I think that would be a fascinating addition to pair with Daniels.
All right, guys, I'm told we're tight on time, conveniently. So we got to talk about the Eagles who won the Super Bowl. Oh, sorry, B-Mac, I cut you off. I was so ready to move past. What do you think about the Commanders before we now even have less time to talk about the Eagles?
I'll go quick. I love the idea of taking a pass catcher. Me personally, I think the defensive side is the way to go. Not knowing exactly which pass rushers will be available at 29, I have the Commanders taking Jahdae Barron, the Thorpe Award winner from Texas. When you're in a division where you have to see CeeDee Lamb twice a year, Malik Neighbors twice a year, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown twice a year, you better have guys that can cover. Yes, they traded for Marshawn Lattimore from the New Orleans Saints a year ago, but durability issues has been a main factor with his career, especially the last few years. So adding more depth in the secondary position will really help their defense out.
All right, now we've got 15 seconds for both of you to talk about the Super Bowl winning Eagles. So, B-Mac, because I cut you off, I'm coming to you first. What do the Eagles need to do to get back to the Super Bowl next year?
Linebacker, Jahed Campbell from Alabama. When you look at who he is as a player, he's an off-ball linebacker, but he has the ability to rush the passer. Remember, Zach Bond had an all-pro year. Only received $3.5 million, so you know he's going to get a significant pay raise. Will it be with the Eagles? We don't know, but he will have a really, really nice market. And then you look at Nakobe Dean. He tore his patella tendon in the wild card game, not knowing exactly where he will be health-wise. I think Campbell is the way to go in terms of adding more depth to the off-ball linebacker position, and he can be utilized as a pass rusher.
Yeah, I like that spot there for linebacker for the Eagles. But to me, it's edge rusher. You referenced Zach Bond being a free agent. You know who's also going to be a free agent is Josh Sweat. And so if you can continue to build on that strength off the edge, if you can get a James Pierce out of Tennessee or Mykel Williams, if he falls to you out of Georgia, another Georgia Bulldog, to me, that's where you need to go if you're Howie Roseman and the Eagles.
I don't like it, but they were the best team in football this year.
They don't need to be better.
We don't need to make them better.
The NFC is, we're full.
Good.
We're full.
We're good. Guys, Always a good time talking ball with the both of you. Taking a look here at the odds to win the NFC when it comes to the NFC East. This hurts my feelings even more, but it doesn't matter. Of course, the Eagles are a plus 300 favorite to win the NFC, followed by the Commanders at plus 850. My Dallas Cowboys got some work to do, 25-1 odds, but not as much work as the Giants, who need just a little bit of everything going into this 2025 season. Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. Man, how the times have changed in the AFC East, both over the years and even from last season to now. Katie, the Aaron Rodgers experiment we know is done. Meanwhile, Buffalo's chosen one came up just short again. This is a league that was once dominated by the Patriots. Now it's dominated by the Bills. All the while, the Dolphins and the Jets just trying to keep up in either direction. But some big changes expected this offseason. So let's talk about some of those changes with our awesome crew. We've got 4 Super Bowls between the two of them in front of us. We've got 2-time Super Bowl champion Bryant B-Mac McFadden, and we've got 2-time Super Bowl analyst Tyler Sullivan joining us here on the show. I know, right? I feel like we need Tully in to put the applause in. Guys, obviously the AFC we know needs some work. So we're going to start with the New England Patriots, who they have the 4th pick in this year's draft, guys, but we also know that Mike Vrabel football is tough. It's physical, and I hope it's going to look a lot better than it did from a year ago if, Tyler, they can build around Drake May. So from your perspective, what is the biggest need to help the Patriots get through this run right now?
Well, you kind of just telegraphed it, right? It's Mike Vrabel, it's tough, it's gritty, and then you reference Drake May, and he's clearly the franchise future going forward. So what do? You get better offensive line play. You go into the trenches, you get an offensive tackle. Will Campbell out of LSU has been the guy that most people, particularly Ryan Wilson, is mocked going to the New England Patriots at number 4 overall, and I think that makes all the sense in the world. Yes, this team has plenty of needs on both sides of the ball. You could look to the trenches on the defensive line. You could look at wide receiver, but to me, the number one thing is to keep Drake May upright, because it won't matter if they draft a wide receiver at number 4 or go sign T. Higgins in free agency. If Drake May is not able to sit in the pocket and feel comfortable to deliver the football in year 2, this offense is going to remain stagnant. It's been an issue, offensive tackle, for the past couple of years for the New England Patriots. You can go all the way back to the draft where they drafted Isaiah Wynn in the 1st round, and that really didn't pan out for them. The tackle out of Georgia. So this has been an issue building for the Patriots going back to the days of Mac Jones, Cam Newton, now continuing with Drake May. So for me, it's solidify the offensive line. You might even need to double dip. I think at number 4, you try to get Will Campbell as your left tackle, and in free agency, try to find one on the right side.
Well, this is a team, they need a lot. They need a lot. And for me, it's all about playmakers. They got to go get some playmakers to add to the young quarterback. They got to find a way to go get some playmakers to add to the defense. So sitting there at 4, if Abdul Carter is available, you draft him. If Travis Hunter is available, you draft him. Both players are day 1 starters immediately. Bookend starters, guys that can provide production for your organization for at least a decade. And they've shown the ability to change the entire culture instantly. Now, if Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter, they're off the board, Tyler, I'm right there with you. You got to go get Will Campbell. He has had an outstanding career. Since stepping foot on campus there for LSU, he was a starter. True freshman, first football game in a collegiate uniform against Jared Verse. Stood up, he battled for 4 quarters as a true freshman, so he's seen a lot of football. And to your point, Tyler, if you're able to go get a guy like Will Campbell, don't worry about it. He will be starting day 1.
I like that. BMX not that specific. He's like, y'all need to go out and get some playmakers for this team. And Haley, just going back to that wall, did you see that Haley Steinfeld, who is Josh Allen's fiance, when they asked who the other people are in the division, she goes, well, there's the Bills, and then there's all of the Bills' sons. Of course, Patriots fans probably have something to say about that and all of their rings. But moving on here, the New York Jets looking for a quarterback and a whole lot more. Former Jet Aaron Glenn is excited about his new staff. But BMAC, we know going into year 1 with that franchise, it's going to be an uphill battle. Where do you think that they need to make the most improvement?
Well, I kind of been going back and forth. Offensive lineman, defensive lineman. Clearly, when you look at Morgan Moses becoming a free agent, Tyler Smith becoming a free agent, and both guys are older, you need to address maybe one of the tackle positions, but later on in the draft. So I'm taking the defensive line right now. I think that is the biggest need for the New York Jets, especially in the 1st round. When you look at a guy like Mason Grimm, If he's available at number 7, you do not waste any time. There's nothing to think about. You go get him and add him. He is the best interior lineman in the draft by far. It is not just about run support. You see him getting after the quarterback. And if you pair Mason next to Quinnen Williams, good luck when you talk about trying to go get guys like Josh Allen in your division, Tua Tagovailoa in your division. Those are the teams you're chasing. Those are the teams you need to have success against, especially at the quarterback play. And if you're able to go get a guy like Mason, he will make Josh Allen's life a little more difficult, and the same can be said for Tua Tagovailoa.
I absolutely love that pick, especially pairing that with defensive-minded head coach and Aaron Glenn. But for me, it starts and stops with the quarterback, right? This team still needs a quarterback. We're coming off of the team officially parting ways with Aaron Rodgers, and we're kind of walking into the great unknown with the New York Jets at the quarterback position. Now, that might be the need. The question is, how do they get there? They could obviously go into free agency, try to get into the trade market to try to find that quarterback. But if we're specifically trying to find the avenues for them at number 7 overall, it's going to be tricky. If they're going down the Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders type of route, you're probably hoping for a trade up, because as much as we're going to talk about, the Tennessee Titans probably not passing on a quote unquote generational talent, and whether that means Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, or if the Cleveland Browns want to have a Myles Garrett replacement in Abdul Carter at number 2, I always sit back and say, you know what? These two teams still need a quarterback. So if you're the New York Jets or their crosstown rival, the New York Giants, I'm concerned about those teams attacking the quarterback position early in the draft. So for me, I'm trying to trade up as often as I can if you fall in love with a Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders if you're the New York Jets. Because at the end of the day, the success of this organization is going to rest on if they can hit on this position. Again, whether that's free agency or here is what we're talking about right now, the NFL draft. So to me, it's still quarterback, no matter which way they can try to identify that problem.
Unfortunately, the rest of the team also feeling some of those struggles, guys. The NFLPA report cards came out, and Woody Johnson, the only owner to receive an F from his players. So some work to do for sure when it comes to the Jets.
A little awkward.
The Dolphins, meanwhile, though, got an A. They got the best report card. So a little transition to some positivity there, guys. We know as well that the Dolphins, another one of those teams that could use some work. Teron Armstead sort of weighing retirement at this moment, BMAC, so that sort of frees up some money. What do the Dolphins need? Because it feels like they had the roster in place to really make some noise, and things just didn't work out because of injuries. So where do the Dolphins go here? What's the first point of business when it comes to Miami?
Offensive line. You talked about Teron Armstead, status moving forward is in question. You look at both guards, they're free agents as well. So they got to find a way to improve the offensive line, because to your point, Haley, yes, they have a lot of talented players on the offensive side, but it doesn't mean anything if the offensive linemen are not doing what they're supposed to do. So me personally, if I'm the Miami Dolphins, Armand Mimbo from Minnesota, he is the guy you target. The thing I love about Armand, he has the versatility to either play guard or tackle, and clearly those are two significant needs for the Miami Dolphins. I believe he will be a plug-and-play player instantly. I love the physical nature that he plays with. And one thing about Armand, anytime he gets his hands on you, he is going to finish the block. He's not a nice guy. He is a guy that is throwing people out of the club. And if you play on the offensive line, you have to be a bouncer at any given time, willing to kick you out of the club if you're not properly dressed. That's who Mimbo is. I think he would be a great addition to the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, and to that point, BMAC, I think that Teron Armstead's kind of the key variable to this whole thing, because if he's deciding to come back, well then, okay, it frees you up to do a little bit more. If he decides to retire, well then you really have to emphasize the offensive tackle position, really the offensive line as a whole. Could Kelvin Banks be an option there out of Texas? Those are the things that they're going to need to discuss. Let's play the other side of it. If Teron Armstead comes back, I still think that this team needs a secondary pass catcher or another pass catcher to put in this offense. You can kind of talk about that, whether that's a wide receiver in Luther Burden or Matthew Golden, or you could look at the tight end spot. Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, those couple of players I think would be really interesting, because it feels like the Miami Dolphins have been trying to find that third pass catching option in their offense over the last couple of years. OBJ was one at the receiver position. They kind of stumbled into it with Jonnu Smith at the tight end spot. That's why you kind of open up the possibility of maybe drafting another tight end, do a little bit more 12 personnel in Mike McDaniel's offense. So to me, that is what I think is going to be interesting, especially because kind of the elephant in the room is that we still don't necessarily know what's going to happen with Tyreek Hill. He had wrist surgery earlier this offseason. We all know what happened at the end of the season where he said he's quote unquote out and then walking it back all Super Bowl week. It still feels like there's another shoe to drop in that saga, but it should serve as a reminder that life with Tyreek Hill is not long. He's still kind of in the twilight of his career. He's still got plenty of good years in front of him, but still, there is going to be a need here to have a running mate alongside Jalen Waddle, so that might be an option for them at pass catcher.
I agree with both of them. I think both of those positions are going to be very important for them. All right, if the Bills are the daddy of the division, they are still just one game away from breaking through. Josh Allen finally winning MVP, Haley, but coming up short in the AFC Championship game. They already locked up Khalil Shakir, which thank God, right, for the next few seasons. But what else do the Bills need to get over the hump? We'll start with you, B-Mac.
Well, when you look at Brandon Beane, since becoming the GM for the Buffalo Bills going back to his first draft in 2018, he has traded the first-round selection 5 times, even going back to a year ago, moving out of the first round. So if they keeps this first-round pick intact, Shavon Revel is the guy for me. And here's why. You potentially could lose Rasul Douglas to free agency. And if you look at his style of play, he's around 6'3", very, very nimble, plays with great pad level. He fits a Sean McDermott-like corner. And you need to address the talent issue in the secondary, especially if you're losing a guy like Rasul Douglas. So I understand he tore his ACL this past season for East Carolina. The luxury, it happened earlier in the year, so he should be ready to go by the start of the season. He is a legit first-round type of talent. He does a great job in coverage, but I also love his willingness to tackle. So if the Buffalo Bills keep this first-round selection, that is the guy for me. But looking at what Brandon Beane has done in years past, I wouldn't be surprised to see Brandon make some type of move, maybe moving up or moving out of the first round, because he's shown he does not care a lot about first-round picks, and he does not mind moving either direction.
You know, if you're Brandon Beane, if you're Sean McDermott, you're sitting back and watching that Super Bowl, and you're seeing the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely torch the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that has just been impossible to get over the last few years during the Josh Allen era. And so I think that what they're going to learn from that is we need to continue bolstering the pass rush. The way that we can attack Patrick Mahomes, or at least try to, is mimic the ways that the Philadelphia Eagles were able to do in that Super Bowl, which is complete pressure in the middle, on the edge, whichever way you can do it. So to me, it's adding more pass rushers, especially because we don't know the status of Von Miller. He is obviously a Hall of Fame talent, but to me, I wonder if he's going to be a cap casualty. A lot of reports and stuff like that indicate that he could be someone that the Bills need to cut loose to get cap compliant. Best way to do that, to replace him, is to bring in cheap young talent. I look at a guy like Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State, possibly helping you off the edge. So to me, it's mimicking what the Philadelphia Eagles were able to do to get over this dreaded monster that has been the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC.
I'm with you on this one, Tyler, and I'll even take it a step further than that. It's what the Bucs did to beat them in their first Super Bowl loss. It's that pressure. It's getting out and punching them in the face and making sure that Patrick Mahomes cannot be Patrick Mahomes. Thanks, B-Mac. Thanks, Tyler. Sit tight, though, as we are going to tackle the NFC next. Before we do, let's look at some odds to win the AFC for teams, of course, in the AFC East. Bills plus 375. Heavy favorites here. Heavy favorites here. You got the Dolphins at plus competition. Come on now. Dolphins at plus 2,500. Patriots plus 3,000. Jets plus 6,000. They were a favorite last year to win this division with Aaron Rodgers. Not so more anymore.
Well, we're going to continue the conversation about the draft. It's all going to take place on April 24th. That's when it begins. Teams looking to fill in holes this offseason in the draft. Really a perfect opportunity to get some young talent all week long. We're looking at each division and top draft needs today, focused on the NFC West. Mike Renner and Bryant McFadden back with us to talk about this upcoming draft and the needs for the NFC West. We're going to start with the 49ers. They have the 11th overall pick. Now, they could use some more depth behind Nick Bosa. There's some turnover in the secondary over there. Maybe someone to help protect Purdy. Where do you think that they need to look?
I think they need to look defensive line, specifically in the draft, because that's where you find the real impact guys. 3 of John Lynch's 4 first-round picks were along the defensive line. That's where he invested early, and without the first-rounders in recent years after that Trey Lance trade, that's where they've kind of regressed. Last year was probably their worst defensive line in years. After Nick Bosa went down, they really did not generate much in the way of pressure, and this is a deep defensive end class. Put all that together, and I'd be really surprised if pick 11 isn't one of these defensive ends in this draft class.
Well, for me, I'm on the opposite side. The offensive line is the way to go for me with the San Francisco 49ers, and here's why. Their best offensive lineman, Trent Williams, he's still an outstanding player, but he's 36 years old. He's dealt with injuries in past seasons as well. So now it's about trying to add some depth and, most importantly, talent to that unit, because outside of Trent Williams, we saw inconsistencies surface throughout that offensive line. So me personally, trying to get the best out of your quarterback along with your entire offense, it's all about getting prepared to move on from Trent Williams at some point in time whenever he decides to call it quits. When you look at the talent that could be there available, you can go get you an athletic, outstanding tackle at the 11th pick. So offensive line will be the position for me to go when it comes to the San Francisco 49ers.
All right, let's talk about the Cardinals, because on defense, on that side, it could look very, very different come the upcoming season. They have a lot of impending free agents. They also have a lot of money to spend, which is certainly helpful. They're picking 16th overall, though. So how would they address that if it's, for the draft and they're not going to be spending all that money elsewhere in free agency?
Yeah, I think, again, defensive line super deep. The position I'm looking at for them, though, is defensive tackle, because they have some options on the edge. They traded for Baron Browning midseason. I expect them to re-sign him with how he played down the stretch for them. But they don't have options at defensive tackle. Their entire defensive tackle unit last year combined for fewer pressures than Chris Jones. That entire room, like 8 guys, had fewer pressures than Chris Jones. That's how inept they were at attacking the passer. You can get by with kind of the no-name defense they have in the secondary. You can't get by with a no-name defense along the defensive line. We saw that in Philly and how they won the Super Bowl. So if you're Arizona, that's where I'm looking. I'd love a guy like Kenneth Grant out of Michigan to start resetting the tone of that front seven.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the defensive side, but I go edge rusher. You look at the ability for an individual to win one-on-one matchups in their defense. They don't really have that in terms of talent and potential. So being able to find a way to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks, not utilizing blitz concepts, could really do wonders for their entire defense on all 3 levels. So me personally, when you look at the edge defenders that we believe will be outstanding pressure-like players in the National Football League, that would improve their defense. When you look at Mikael Williams, he could potentially be available there for the Cardinals to select. If he's there, that's a guy you cannot pass on, because he's shown the ability to win one-on-one matchups and be overly disruptive in the running game as well. And, of course, his teammate, Jalen Walker, could be available as well. So I would love to see one of those Bulldogs, former Bulldogs, hearing their name called in the first round by the Cardinals.
The Cards also doubled their win total. They were sitting in first place in the NFC West in mid-November, and then everything kind of dropped off. But put in some good players in the right spots. You never know what's going to happen in that division. We're going to talk about the Seahawks next. So Geno Smith entering his final year of his contract. Team's most pressing needs, some might say it's on the O-line over there. 18th overall pick. Where do you go?
I'm going interior offensive line. They had one of, if not the worst interior offensive line in the NFL last year. They combined for 116 pressures. That's almost 40 pressures per player up front. It's almost 3 a game. That's not good if you are trying to be Geno Smith and lead a passing attack, which obviously why it was so up and down last year. Now, going from Ryan Grubbs at OC to Clint Kubiak, he's going to protect that offensive line better, but they're going to run the ball more. And to run the ball, usually you need an offensive line still. So I'm looking at interior offensive line. Obviously, probably not with that first overall pick. The only guy I would consider there, Tyler Booker out of Alabama. After that, you're probably looking into day 2 for a tackle to guard convert, but good Lord, did they need help along that offensive line.
Well, for me, hey, Mike, I was going back and forth, O-line, D-line, O-line, D-line. Well, I'm going to take the defensive line, and here's why. Their head coach, Mike McDonald, guess what? He's a defensive play caller. Yeah. So clearly there could be some bias there, and that actually would help their team in terms of finding a way to be more consistent on the defensive side. Going to get you a guy that can put pressure on opposing quarterbacks and play stout and run support as well. So when you look at Mike McDonald and the way how he utilizes his defensive linemen, moving them around, look at Derek Hall, second-year player. His rookie year, 2023, had 0 sacks. Under Mike McDonald, he had 8 sacks. So let's say a guy like Shamar Stewart is there for the Seattle Seahawks. You do not pass on a guy like that who can be a plug-and-play player instantly in your defense. He improves the entire defense, and now you talk about a guy that can be a mainstay for your organization for a decade plus based on his skill set and his potential. And I really would love to see Mike McDonald being able to work with a guy like Shamar Stewart, who didn't give you the sacks at A&M that we believe he should have provided. But with this system and the coaching that he would receive there in Seattle, the sky would be the limit, only if he is available for the Seattle Seahawks when it's time for them to make that pick.
All right, last and certainly not least, we're going to talk about the Rams because I feel like this conversation could change depending on what happens in the coming weeks. We know Matt Stafford, his agent, has been given permission to speak to other teams, see what else is out there. Cooper Kupp also on the trading block. They're picking 26th overall. What is the direction based off of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, quarterback would obviously rise to the top should they trade Matt Stafford, but I do think it's wide receiver because they will be trading or releasing Cooper Kupp. That just leaves Puka Nacua. Now, Jordan Whittington was nice for a sixth-rounder. He's not your second wide receiver next to Puka Nacua. He's not replacing what Cooper Kupp did in that offense. I think the dream scenario for them is Emeka Egbuka, the Ohio State wide receiver, falling, because not only is he an NFL-ready route runner, not only is he a guy who gets after in the run game and can block, but he has speed. This offense lacks high-end juice down the football field from one of those top three wide receivers. Emeka Egbuka probably going to run the low 4.4s. He does that. He might go higher than 26, but if he's at the Rams pick at 26, he should be the pick, in my opinion.
Well, for me, I go defensive side, the secondary cornerback. When you look at what we saw last year, they really outkicked their coverage. They played really, really well. But it's time to add some more young talent to that position group. You look at Fuller, he did fairly well, but Ahkello Witherspoon is getting up there in age. So it's about going ahead and to provide some insurance in terms of depth and a youthful movement. And when you look at the Rams, one thing that we're starting to see about the Los Angeles Rams, Sean McVay and Les Snead, Tallahassee has been great to them. So I can easily see Les Snead going back to Florida State and going to get a guy by the name of A.Z. Thomas to add to their defense. When you look at Jerry Verse, Florida State, great year. Braden Fish, Florida State, great year. So let's go back to the well and see if any more water is left in that well. And there's a lot of water left in the well when you look at A.Z. Thomas. He went down to Mobile, was locked down, 6'2", 190, very, very nimble, play with great eyes. He's ball aware. He tackles with the right angles, and he just loves to compete in one-on-one situations. And I believe if they're able to get him at 26, he could potentially be a day one starter instantly upon arrival there in Los Angeles.
Former Gator over here was making quite the face when you mentioned
you know how it goes, B-Mac. You know, you were going corner, FSU. I had to watch, like, FSU highlights, even though, you know, we're better than you this season. It doesn't matter.
They didn't have many last year, though.
Exactly. We were, we were diving into the archives to find the highlights. But for this guy, they were worth it.
Took a left turn over here. Mike Renner, Brian McFadden.
Go Gators, baby.
Appreciate you both here. The NFC draft needs out there in the West.
Yeah, we're looking at the NFC West teams, their odds to win the Super Bowl, and this was the division that was, we kept calling it the wild NFC West because there was a new division leader almost every other week in the middle of the season. The Niners, though, still sitting at the top at 12-1 in terms of the division, and of course that all depends if they can stay healthy.
Well, the NFL draft is on April 24th. That's where it all begins. And I don't know, over the next few weeks, I guess, until April 24th. This is all we're going to be talking about. The combine, the draft, the mock drafts. It never ends here on HQ. And today we're focusing on the AFC West and their draft needs. So to break that down, we're bringing in our NFL writers, Tyler Sullivan and John Breach, joining us now on HQ. So AFC West teams, we're going to start with the Raiders. They got Tom Brady helping out in the front office. They got money to spend. That's not what we're going to talk about right now. A glaring hole at quarterback. How do they fix it? Tyler, 6th overall pick. Do we get a quarterback in the draft? What do you think?
Well, I think they'd love if owner Tom Brady came down and started playing quarterback for him. I think that would be the top option, right? I mean, why not? He's done it a million times. Sure, bring Tom Brady back. But overall, yes. Ideally, a quarterback falls to them at number 6 overall. I just have my doubts that that's going to happen for this team. I mean, we were just listening to JJ and Ryan Wilson and Pre Prisco talk about the situation at the top of the NFL draft with the Tennessee Titans. I look at that team, I look at the Cleveland Browns, I look at the New York Giants at number 3 overall. As much as we're going to talk about possibly Tennessee trading the pick or Abdul Carter falling somewhere within that top 3, all 3 of those teams need a quarterback. And that's bad news for the Las Vegas Raiders because they also need a quarterback. So to me, yes, that's the clear need. My concern is the avenue. How do they get to the top of the NFL draft? How do they get to a spot where they can feel comfortable that a quarterback they like is going to be there? We assume right now that Cam Ward could be the number 1 overall pick going to the Tennessee Titans. Do you potentially try to swing a trade with the Cleveland Browns, even though I think that they need a quarterback as well? But do you try to leap over the New York Giants to get Shedeur Sanders, someone that has a relationship with new owner Tom Brady, kind of mentored him during his days at Colorado? So there's opportunity here for the Las Vegas Raiders to fill that need. My concern is, will they actually be able to select a quarterback that they want at the NFL draft?
John, asking you kind of the same question, do you think this is a team that will trade up to get that QB that they need and desire?
I don't know if they would trade up, Jenny, because they have so many holes on this roster where you're thinking, man, if we don't get a quarterback, we could get a wide receiver, we could get a cornerback, we could get a running back. There are just so many needs that the Raiders have right now. So I think if you're Las Vegas, if you're Pete Carroll, if you're Spytek, if you're Tom Brady, you're kind of just sitting back and you're going to be paying attention in free agency, because if the Giants go out and sign a quarterback in free agency, or if the Browns go out and sign a quarterback in free agency, then maybe those 2 teams won't use their first-round pick on a quarterback in the draft. And then if that happens, it becomes more realistic that someone like Shedeur Sanders falls to you at 6th overall. We've seen Shedeur Sanders kind of flirting with Las Vegas for the past few months. I follow him on Instagram. He's got the videos up there. He seems to love the city of Las Vegas. So I think he would be thrilled if he ended up playing for the Raiders. As Tyler said, there's some connections with Tom Brady there. So I do think the Raiders would love to get a quarterback at 6. I don't know that they would trade up just because of the holes I mentioned. But again, there are other guys they can get. Maybe you go cornerback. You get Will Johnson out of Michigan. Maybe you go wide receiver. They just have a lot of options if the quarterback doesn't fall to them. But I don't think they need to trade up to get one.
I feel like Shedeur Sanders in Vegas just works, like the aura of it all. I just feel like it would be really good. They do also have the 2nd most cap space in the league, over $92 million at their disposal, so they might try and work something out there. We're going to look at the Chargers next. Top 5 defense. They have holes to fill this offseason. You look at the offensive side. Ladd McConkey was really kind of their only long-term asset returning. You think that Justin Herbert could use more weapons out there. Who do you think that they could target?
Yeah, I still think it's a wide receiver. Yeah, I still think it's a wide receiver. I think that's the position to look at. And you can make the case for other positions with the Chargers, too, because as much as, you know, they're an up-and-coming team, they have Justin Herbert, they have Jim Harbaugh, there's still some holes here. A wide receiver is one for sure. You know, you could probably look at Matthew Golden out of Texas in the 1st round there, possibly as a receiver option. I think we look at Ladd McConkey and say, okay, that position's fine. You need more than one receiver. You have Quentin Johnston, hasn't really panned out to what you thought he was going to be when you drafted him earlier in his career. You have Josh Palmer going into free agency, so there's still plenty of holes that they need in terms of playmaking on the offensive side of the ball, especially to keep up with teams like the Denver Broncos, the Kansas City Chiefs, and, you know, we're just talking about if the Raiders get a quarterback. We've seen with the Washington Commanders what a quarterback can do to an organization if you hit it, so you still need to keep up with the Joneses in the division. I still think that that's wide receiver, but on the flip side, I do think that there's other holes here. I think pass rusher is one that's kind of under the radar. Khalil Mack going into free agency. Do you maybe look at a James Pierce out of Tennessee in the 1st round, possibly to fill those shoes? You have J.K. Dobbins going into free agency. You don't know if he's going to return. Do you try to find a running back somewhere in the first couple of days of the NFL draft to fill his shoes? So as much as this is an up-and-coming team, plenty of talent, good quarterback, good coaching play, there's a lot of needs. But wide receiver to me is one that keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think Tyler hit the nail on the head here. If I'm running the Chargers, I think the 2 positions they need to look at most with that 22nd overall pick is wide receiver and pass rusher. Look, Ladd McConkey had a great rookie season, but Justin Herbert needs somebody else to throw to. We saw it every time the Chargers played a team that had a good defense. The Texans in the playoffs, there was no one else for him to throw to. Then we'd see a Herbert meltdown. We saw all the interceptions he threw in that playoff loss. So you got to get him some help so that there is a number 2 receiver there. And now on the pass rushing side, this is a division. We saw if you want to take down the Kansas City Chiefs, the Philadelphia Eagles showed you how you do it. You sacked Patrick Mahomes 6 times in the Super Bowl. And so that is kind of the recipe you need to be staring at if you're the Chargers. You need to get more pressure on Patrick Mahomes. And if you have Khalil Mack leaving in free agency, which could potentially happen, you have to bring someone in and kind of try and replace that. And let's not forget, you look at who the Chargers have going to hit free agency next year. Joey Bosa could be gone. They could get rid of him this year. That would be save $25 million in cap space if they were to cut him. But at most, he's probably not going to be there past the 2025 season. So you need some pass rushing help. So maybe you get Mike Green out of Marshall. Maybe you get Nick Skirton out of Texas A&M. Michael Williams out of UGA. So there are a lot of options. I think the Chargers, the fact that they need multiple positions will help them. And they should have a lot of good options at 22nd overall.
Yep, Chargers at number 22. Tyler, real quick, is there a receiver out there that you like fitting in out there in LA?
Well, I think that, if we expand it to pass catcher, because I think that, in today's NFL, we can do that a little bit. You look at Colston Loveland out of Michigan. There's obviously connections there with Coach Harbaugh, someone who could be that, Travis Kelce-like, receiving option, more of a slot receiver person in that offense. I think that that's someone that I would take a look at. Matthew Golden's another explosive wide receiver out of Texas, who I mentioned earlier. There's going to be options for the Chargers here. But again, if you want to expand it a little bit more, I think possibly a tight end could come into this offense as well. And there's obviously a connection there with Michigan with Loveland.
All right, we're going to move on to the Broncos now. They're really in a prime winning window. Bo Nix still on his rookie deal, but getting him a quality tight end really could do wonders for his development as he enters year 2. They are currently standing at pick number 20. Tyler, who do you like there?
Yeah, and I referenced him earlier. I think Colston Loveland, someone that you could look at. You look at Tyler Warren out of Penn State. There's definitely some options here, because when you look at the offense of the Denver Broncos last year, you might not even think that they had a tight end on the roster. That's how bad the position was in terms of a production standpoint. No tight end went over 200 yards on the season that was on the active roster for them. So you're scratching your head like, boy, wasn't Sean Payton leading an offense that had Jimmy Graham at one point playing at a Pro Bowl, all-pro level, just absolutely lighting up offenses in New Orleans? Where is that going to come from? We've pointed to like Deebo Samuel as kind of that quote-unquote joker label in their offense, where you can kind of move around players like a chess piece. Another way that you could fill that role is by bringing in a tight end. They need to do it regardless, whether it's just bringing in depth in free agency. You can look at guys like Juwan Johnson, who clearly has a connection with Sean Payton from their days in New Orleans, was there when Johnson was drafted. You could go that route, but you could go Tyler Conklin. You could go down the list, but ultimately you need some youth at the position to start replenishing, because right now it's completely barren. So if you look at Tyler Warren, Cortland Loveland, those are 2 guys in the first round that you could say make sense for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and Bo Nix had this great rookie season despite the fact that he really didn't have any tight end help. It wasn't just that they didn't have a single guy over 200 yards. They didn't have a single tight end go over 20 receptions. It was like Sean Payton forgot that he needed a tight end in his offense. And as Tyler said, his offense thrived in New Orleans when he had a great tight end in Jimmy Graham. And if you look around the rest of the division, tight end is such a huge part of how teams play offense in the AFC West, whether it's Travis Kelce, whether it's Brock Bowers. So for the Broncos to go out and get a tight end, get kind of a little security blanket for Bo Nix to throw to, I think that would give him a little bit more confidence going into his second year. And Tyler mentioned the 2 big tight end prospects that could be available at 20th overall. That's Colston Love out of Michigan. That's Tyler Warren out of Penn State. And those are really only kind of your 2 first-round graded tight ends. After that, there's kind of a big drop-off. So if you don't go tight end there, you could get another pass catcher, go wide receiver, get Bo Nix some help, whether it is tight end or receiver, maybe linebacker. So I do think that tight end is the best option, but because there aren't a lot of tight end options in that first round, it could be something the Broncos have to wait to get until the 2nd or 3rd round, but they do absolutely need to get some help for Bo Nix.
I'm putting my money on Tyler Warren. Man, watching that kid out there is unbelievable. So that's my pick. That's my pick there. The Chiefs.
So this is a team with 4 picks in the top 100. What do you think Kansas City needs to get back on top of the mountaintop and actually win the Super Bowl this time around, Tyler?
Yeah, no, I still think that they needed to add another wide receiver. You go down the list and you say, okay, they've drafted pretty well. They bring in Rashee Rice, they got Xavier Worthy, 2 young guys. Obviously, Rice coming off the injury, but there's promise at the position. You go beyond that. You look at what's going into free agency. DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Brown, Justin Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman. All of those guys are hitting free agency, and we're not even talking about the potential of Travis Kelce retiring as we expand to pass catchers within this offense. So to me, you need to try to figure out where you can find your next go-to top-tier weapon. You could be Xavier Worthy, could develop into that, but you still need to find a Matthew Golden, a Luther Burden. You need to be able to try to be open to finding that next weapon for Patrick Mahomes in their offense, because again, at some point they're going to have to phase into a new era. I was just talking about we don't know the future of Travis Kelce. Even if he comes back for 2025, at some point we're going to have to see an evolution for Patrick Mahomes in this next chapter of whatever the Chiefs story is going to be going forward post Travis Kelce, how they retool their roster, how they retool their offense, trying to get back into the winner's circle and to be Super Bowl champions. It's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Again, they have some young pieces in Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, but continuing to build around Patrick Mahomes as he goes into this next phase of his career is going to be massive.
Yeah, Tyler, I do agree they could use some wide receiver help, but let's be honest, the Chiefs could have had Jerry Rice in his prime and Randy Moss in his prime in the Super Bowl, and they still would have lost that game 40-22 because Patrick Mahomes did not have any time to throw the ball. The Chiefs need to do one thing, I think, in the first round of the draft. It is retool the offensive line. You've got to figure out what's going on there, because if Patrick Mahomes is getting blasted on every play, it does not matter who his receivers are. And so if you look at where they need help, I think you have to start at left tackle. You have Joe Thuney playing left tackle. He's a guard. That's their offensive line situation. That's where it was that you had a guard playing left tackle. And so you look across. They could lose Trey Smith. So now you also could need another guard there. So you look at where they are in the offensive line. I think that is the first thing they have to get figured out. So maybe you go get Josh Connerly of Oregon, Arante Ursary from Minnesota. Those are guys that could fall into their lap. Josh Simmons, who's coming off a patellar injury. So maybe his stock falls a little bit and he falls to 31st overall. But whatever you are, you have to get protection for Patrick Mahomes. So I think it makes sense for the Chiefs to take an offensive lineman at 31st overall.
We're just waiting to see what happens with Travis Kelce. I think all of us are sitting waiting as he's kicking the can down the street. How many times did he say that in his post review of this NFL offseason, deciding his future? We'll wait and see. Tyler Sullivan, John Breach, getting ready for this draft that's coming up in April. And when you take a look at the AFC West teams, their chances to win the Super Bowl as it stands right now,
Look
the
at
Chiefs
the Raiders.
plus 700. Yeah,
we barely could fit all the zeros in there.
What happens if they end up with a top QB? You just don't know.
Someone's going to win a big bet there for sure.
Back here on CBS Sports HQ, where it's Combine Week, and we're continuing to go over the biggest needs for each team in the league. Now it's time to turn our focus to the NFC South. Down the stretch, it was a 2-team race between the Falcons and Bucs, but the Bucs won the division. However, were bounced in the wild card round at the hand of the Washington Commanders. So how does each team begin to really reset, starting with the draft? For the answer, we welcome back in our NFL experts. It's Will Brinson and John Breach. Guys, let's go ahead and start with the Saints here. There's work to be done. New head coach and Kellen Moore, they have the worst cap space situation right now in the league. Chase Young could find a new home come free agency. So how do they find some gems in the NFL draft? Will, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, look, you need to roll back the clock and have a 2017 draft if you're the Saints, where they basically went for this 7-10 team and just found Ryan Ramczyk, Marshawn Lattimore, Alvin Kamara. I mean, you got to hit a lot of stuff. The problem is, as you point out, Jordan, their cap space is a mess. They've said they're going to be aggressive in free agency. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think they really need to focus in on trying to find some edge rush help here. Chase Young gone, Cameron Jordan going to be 36. I mean, he's getting up there in what is probably ends up being a Hall of Fame career, and you just haven't had a lot of success at that position in recent years in the draft. They've whiffed on some higher picks at the edge rusher position. So you got a lot of talent there, and you see that meat too. Once you get outside the sort of the top 10, you start to see a lot of names on this list that we have at CBSSports.com, all the way down to like a Landon Jackson, those sort of guys, where they're going to be very variable in terms of where they go in the draft after you get outside that top 15. So I think the Saints in particular look like a team that could scoop up some edge rush talent, either with the first round pick, maybe even with their first 2 picks.
Yeah, Brenton, we're absolutely on the same page here. I think edge rush makes the most sense. And as you said, they are so far over the salary cap. They really do need to hit a few home runs in this draft, because when you are that far over, that's how you build your roster cheaply, is by getting good players in the draft. And it's not just Chase Young. You also have Peyton Turner, who could possibly be leaving in free agency. So you kind of have this gaping hole there at the edge rush spot. And so you do need to add depth there. And so all eyes are going to be on Kellen Moore, but really it's Brandon Staley, the new defensive coordinator, who is going to have all the pressure on him this year. Because you look at what this defense did in 2024, they gave up the 2nd most rushing yards in the NFL. They gave up the 6th most passing yards in the NFL. So you absolutely have to do something. Maybe if you don't go edge, you could go corner, because you have Paulson Adebo, who's going to be a free agent. And so you're going to need help there. But I do think the Saints will probably best serve to draft a defensive player with that 9th overall pick.
All right, let's get to a defense that didn't do much in 2024. That's the Carolina Panthers. His team's defense ranked dead last in almost every single key metric this past season. So I don't even know, John, if it's really a question. I mean, does the entire focus for the Panthers need to be on defense here?
Absolutely, Jordan. You just hit the nail on the head. This was the worst defense in the NFL last year. They gave up the most yards per game. They gave up the most points per game. So I don't think they can really go wrong as long as they draft a defensive player. Maybe you get a pass rusher kind of pair with Derek Brown and Jadeveon Clowney. You absolutely could use some help there. They're going to be losing Mike Jackson in free agency. That's a cornerback, so you could stand to draft a corner if you are the Carolina Panthers. And then maybe you get a defensive tackle just so you help your pass rushers take some pressure off of them. So they need help at every layer of their defense. So I don't think they can go wrong by drafting any defensive player. Go defense. And I do know that maybe you think about getting Bryce Young some help at receiver, but I think the Panthers really need to focus on improving their defense in the first round of the draft.
Yeah, I thought I was being too broad when I was going to say defensive line and just throw out either defensive tackle or edge rusher. Turns out, nope, not at all. Breach is going any defensive player, and he's not wrong. This Panthers defense is terrible, or was terrible. Hopefully it gets better. I think Mason Graham could make a lot of sense for them. It depends on what they really need to figure out what they want to do and how they want to attack things schematically and how they want to build out that defense. Do you want to pair somebody with Derek Brown in the interior and maybe make like easier for your edge rushers? Do you think there's a true, I think to me, they need to get the front 4 shored up before anything else, because that secondary is going to be, it's worthless if they can't stop the run or can't put some pressure on the quarterback. You just see it like over and over again. They would get gashed in the run and then people would just pass on them. So I'm suggesting you go either defensive tackle or edge rusher here for the Panthers and really lean into defense in this draft.
Yeah, we might recommend them repeat what they did in 2020. As you know, the Panthers were the first team in the league to use all 7 picks on defense. So they've gone down this route before. It might not be a bad idea to repeat what happened in 2020. Let's go ahead and get to a team that tried to give the Buccaneers a run for their money. That's the Atlanta Falcons. Down the stretch, came up short, have now missed the postseason the past 7 seasons. So, Will, how do the Falcons try to get to that next step, starting with the NFL draft?
Well, you talk about a team that needs to draft defense. I mean, like the Falcons didn't even send any offensive coaches to the combine. That's how hell-bent they are on drafting defense. They're like, nah, y'all go like practice throwing having guys throw the football on the practice field. Only defensive guys allowed at the combine. We're not even going to look at offensive guys in this draft. That's how bad the Falcons are in terms of their defensive needs. But I think edge rusher, again, I mean, like we're sort of repeating it here, but I mean, it's just a common theme for this division. Edge rusher is really important for the Falcons. Throughout the entire entire year, they would get in these situations where the offense would maybe do enough to keep them in the game, and the defense just simply could not get pressure on the opposing quarterback. I think the Atlanta Falcons, it is paramount that they draft an edge rusher to develop to be their blue chip pass rusher in this draft.
Yeah, Brenton, I absolutely agree with you there. But the problem is they're the 15th overall pick. We just said the Saints and Panthers both need pass rush help, and they are picking ahead of the Saints, so that is not good for Atlanta. But look, this team had the second fewest sacks in the NFL last year. Matthew Judon's about to hit free agency, and then you have some aging veterans there with David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett. So you got to do something with that front four, and pass rush makes the most sense. So I think the Falcons do need to look for an edge rusher at 15th overall.
All right, lastly, let's get to the Bucs here. They made the postseason despite all of the devastating injuries that really plagued this team mid-season. Godwin could become a free agent. We know it's a final contract year for Mike Evans. Will, what do the Bucs need?
Yeah, I mean, you can make the case, Jordan, if you wanted to, that wide receiver is a position the Bucs could attack here. They've said repeatedly they want to get Chris Godwin back. They're doing some contractual stuff that indicates that that is really making it obvious that they want to get him back. But he's going to have plenty of suitors in free agency. And Jalen McMillan was awesome down the stretch. I mean, so I think, you've already drafted a receiver there. For me, I'm looking at just sort of the losses that they have and the needs that they have on this team. And I think, again, I mean, was good life for a quarterback in the NFC South. The Bucs need some edge rush help as well. They should also look at linebacker. You can sort of blend those depending on what kind of player it is and how you want to have him operate in Todd Bowles' scheme. But I think edge rusher, getting pressure on the quarterback, a critical component for the Bucs bouncing back and continuing to keep their run going in the NFC South.
Brenton, we should clearly be running all of these NFC South teams because we're on the same page once again. Look, if the Buccaneers re-sign Chris Godwin, they don't need receiver. But if they don't and he leaves in free agency, I think you have to look at receivers. So let's say he does re-sign, though. As Brenton said, the Buccaneers are very focused on making that happen. Then I do think linebacker is probably the spot you need to go. You look at who could be leaving in free agency: Levante David, Anthony Nelson, Shaq Barrett. So if you get either linebacker or pass rushing help, I think that would make the most sense for the Buccaneers at 19th overall.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there. Incredible insight all week long. That'll do it for us here on CBS Sports HQ. Will Brinson and John Breach with all of the biggest needs for each team in the NFL as the scouting combine continues from Indy. Here's a look at the odds to win the Super Bowl among the NFC South teams. Buccaneers currently with the best odds. We'll need to address some needs, though, on the defensive side of the ball to get it done. Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. This week, we are going through the biggest draft needs for each team as the NFL Combine rolls on. Today, we're taking a look at the AFC South, the Texans finishing on top of the division this season. But how much help does C.J. Stroud actually need? Meanwhile, no secret here, the Titans have a decision to make at quarterback. And how do the Jags start to right the ship under new head coach Liam Cohen? For more on the biggest needs in the AFC South, let's go ahead and say hello to our own Will Brinson and John Breach. Guys, great to see you. Let's go ahead and start with the Titans here. Miserable season, but they do land the #1 overall pick in this year's upcoming NFL draft. Will, it's hard to look past that quarterback is the biggest need on this team.
Yeah, Pete Prisco can write all the flowery Tuscan Castle articles, he wants about Will Levis this offseason. It's not going to change the fact that the Titans desperately need to upgrade at quarterback. And I would be surprised if they didn't do that with the first overall pick, or at least possibly having somebody else trade up, maybe, whether it's for Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, and then, you trade back and get a quarterback. They've got to get somebody, though, and they've got to improve the position and take their shot. And when you have the #1 overall pick, that's typically when you do it. So why not look at a Shedeur Sanders or a Cam Ward, or dare I even say Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, who I think could be in the conversation for the best quarterback in the class, despite not being sort of talked about in that same way as the other two.
Yeah, Brinson, I think you hit the nail on the head. You got to get a quarterback. Now, we don't know who that's going to be, but look, you're not going to win in the NFL unless you have a franchise quarterback. Look at the Super Bowl. It was Jalen Hurts versus Patrick Mahomes. It's Patrick Mahomes 5 of the past 6 years in the AFC. So you need a quarterback who can compete against the Patrick Mahomeses of the world, the Joe Burrows, the Josh Allens. And so when you're the Titans, you're thinking, all right, we're sitting here at 1. This is the perfect spot. We can take Cam Ward. We can take Shedeur Sanders. Now, the one upside of having having the #1 overall pick, especially for Brian Callahan, because he came from Cincinnati where they drafted Joe Burrow. Brian Callahan spent time in Denver when they had Peyton Manning. So he knows what he wants in a good quarterback. And if he decides, I'm not in love with Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, kind of as Brinson was talking about, the Titans can simply trade back. I think dropping back to #3 overall, maybe making a trade with the Giants wouldn't be that crazy, because this team has so many holes on their roster that they can fill those holes by trading back, but also still get a quarterback that they possibly want. So I think the Titans obviously have to get a quarterback, but trading back wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting note, and it'll be interesting to see if that actually comes to fruition. You guys both mentioned it. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, the two top quarterbacks that are expected to go first in this quarterback draft class. You know, they both came out to say that they are not going to be participating in drills in the NFL Combine that is underway. Our crew has had conversations with them. You guys have been able to really tell the kind of person they are, the kind of leader they are. But, John, how much does it hurt them for not participating in drills at the Combine?
It's funny because 5 years ago, it felt like a red flag every time a quarterback didn't compete in drills, didn't work out at the Combine, didn't throw at the Combine. It was like, oh my gosh, his stock is going to tank. He's going to fall out of the first round. But now it just seems like something everyone's doing every year. If we just go back to the 2024 Combine, we had Caleb Williams, we had Drake May, we had Jaden Daniels all sit out of the workout portion at the Combine. And I don't think any of them really hurt any of them that bad. Obviously, Jaden Daniels took his team all the way to the NFC title game. So I think as long as you don't see Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders tank during their pro day, I think they'll be okay, and they'll probably still be the first two quarterbacks taken in the draft.
Yeah, I think this is an old man yelling at a cloud type of thing. If you've got to complain about a quarterback not throwing at the Combine, this is, you go throw at your pro day when you've got timing with the receivers, familiarity with the receivers. You can script out your stuff. And we've seen quarterbacks, as John pointed out, over the last 5-10 years really start to get away from this. So, it sucks for us who, want to see them throw on television. But for the purposes of scouting, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, well, we better get used to it because I think it's becoming the norm. Let's go ahead and work our way through the teams in the AFC South here, going through the biggest needs. Jags, there is a lot of new on this team, we'll say. New head coach, most recently a new and very young GM in James Gladstone, just 34 years old. So, Will, where does the second youngest GM in NFL history even begin?
Dude, I saw this. You see Gladstone doing his podium, and you're like, is this somebody's like executive assistant? How is this guy already a GM? He looks insanely young. I think if you look at the Jaguars, you need to focus on cornerback and defensive back. And they've invested a lot, obviously, in pass rushers with Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen. And so you got the guys who can get after the quarterback. But I mean, the Jaguars, anybody in the NFL could throw. The Titans could throw on the Jaguars last year. I watched them do it. So I think you need to work on cornerback and to look towards the defensive secondary for Jacksonville. This has got to be obviously Liam Cohen comes in. The emphasis is on Trevor Lawrence. I think they'll probably beef up the wide receiver position in free agency. But when it comes to the draft, I think you really got to load up on some defensive players and get some defensive guys in there that can help this Jaguars team become a little more balanced and therefore make Trevor Lawrence's life easier.
Yeah, let me just say, I never felt older than realizing that the Jaguars general manager was born in the 1990s. The 90s, what? There's an NFL general manager born in the 90s. It just blows my mind. But I absolutely agree with Brinson here. You look at where Jacksonville struggled in 2024. They gave up the most passing yards in the NFL. So they really need some help in the secondary. But also, as Brinson alluded to, you got to get some help for Trevor Lawrence. They don't really have anyone behind Brian Thomas Jr. at the receiver position. Well, guess what? This is the one draft where you get that old 2-for-1 by getting a cornerback and getting a wide receiver with the same pick, and that is landing Travis Hunter. So I think the Jacksonville Jaguars need to do anything possible to make sure they get Travis Hunter. That means trading up to the 3rd overall pick, 4th overall pick, whatever it is. They're at 5th overall, so it shouldn't be too difficult to move up. But when you need corner help and you need receiver help and you can get that from the same player, I think you got to go get that player. So I think Travis Hunter is the best fit for Jacksonville right now.
Well, good news that there is some top talent and some big names in those position groups. Let's get to the Colts now. There wasn't a concern about the quarterback position. That was until GM Chris Ballard said earlier this week that he wasn't set on Anthony Richardson being his QB1. So still, though, they have him on their roster. So where else should the Colts really be looking in the upcoming NFL draft, Will?
Yeah, I think you need to look at the offensive line if you're Indianapolis. I mean, this is a team that, for a while had one of the 3 or 4 best offensive lines in football. Ryan Kelly's going to be a free agent. They have some more departures on the inside of that line. And so I think shoring up the interior of the offensive line for the Colts should be a real thing to focus on this offseason, whether or not you're going to bring in competition for Anthony Richardson, right? And I think Kirk Cousins can be an interesting name to bring in there. Clearly, the Colts are not afraid to yank Richardson out of the starting lineup and toss somebody else in there. I think Cousins would fit if he doesn't end up going to Cleveland and Kevin Stefanski. But for the Colts, no matter whether you're bringing in Kirk Cousins or bringing in another veteran or drafting somebody else, which I think would be surprising, or just have Anthony Richardson out there, you need to be able to run the ball with Jonathan Taylor and or Anthony Richardson and protect your quarterback. So I think offensive line is a key component of the Colts offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. The interior offensive line is a huge need. I have that number 2 on my list, Brinson. Number 1, though, is tight end. It is like the Indianapolis Colts forgot that the tight end position existed last year. You look at all their tight ends combined, they didn't even have 40 receptions. They didn't have a single tight end on the team who caught more than 15 passes, which is just unbelievable to think about. So you have to think Shane Steichen would love to get a tight end there. That will help his offense. If Anthony Richardson or whoever that quarterback is kind of has that tight end security blanket. We've seen tight ends emerge as huge playmakers around the NFL, whether it's Travis Kelce. We saw the Raiders have huge success with Brock Bowers, and we're looking here, the top 2 tight ends, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, both could be available when the Colts pick 14th overall, and that's a good spot to get one of those 2 guys. So I think the Colts absolutely need to look at drafting a tight end with that 14th pick.
All right, lastly here, let's get to the Texans, who finished 10-7 on the season, made the divisional round of the playoffs. John, you have to think that receiver is a big need here, with Tank Dell obviously dealing with his injury. Stephon Diggs set to become a free agent. How much is receiver an actual priority for the Texans, John? And what else do they actually need?
Yeah, I think if you're the Houston Texans, your priority is to help C.J. Stroud in whatever that may end up being. Now, could you get a receiver? Absolutely, because you have Stephon Diggs ready to hit free agency. You have Tank Dell coming back from a devastating injury. Nico Collins was dealing with the hamstring issue last season, so that's a little bit worrisome. So, yes, receiver could be something the Texans look at, but for me, I think the number 1 priority needs to be the offensive line. You look at C.J. Stroud last season, he got sacked 52 times. That was the 2nd most sacks that any quarterback took last year, behind only Caleb Williams. If your quarterback doesn't have time to throw, it doesn't matter who the receiver is, because he's not going to be getting those passes off. So you want to make sure Caleb Williams is that C.J. Stroud isn't back there getting beaten up. They both got beat up last season.
Yeah,
it's all confusing. So yeah. So if you're the Texans picking 25th overall, I think you look at someone like Tyler Booker out of Alabama, Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, but I think the interior offensive line probably where the Texans need to start.
And in Bridges' defense, the Bears need to work on the interior offensive line as well, the offensive line for Caleb Williams. So makes total sense. I'm going to say receiver. I think Jordan, you mentioned it, where you have this devastating injury for Tank Dell, late in the season. That's probably going to result in him not being ready to start the year. Stephon Diggs is a free agent, and Nico Collins is freaking awesome. I mean, he's a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, but you don't want to have to ask him to go out there and do everything by himself. I think that's fairly risky, and you've got some big names in this draft class, whether it's Ibuka or Golden, guys who, Trey Harris is awesome at Ole Miss too, man. And so I think you can find somebody, you see where they're ranked there based on our CBSSports.com rankings. I think you can find somebody later in the 1st round that maybe has a lot of upside to pair with Collins. And then you sort of, doesn't force you to pay Diggs. Maybe let you bring back Tank Dell a little more slowly and, put alongside like John Mechie and some of the other younger talent they have. But I think wide receiver is the way to look here for the Texans.
All right. Well, it doesn't matter, as John said, if Stroud doesn't have time to throw, it really doesn't matter which much name is out there catching passes from C.J. Stroud. All right, gentlemen, don't go anywhere because we got the NFC South to talk about next. Here's a look at the best odds to win the Super Bowl among the AFC South teams. We'll see if the Texans can add some firepower at the wide receiver position this offseason and boost their current odds as they currently lead with the best odds to win the Super Bowl.
Back here on CBS Sports HQ, we already checked off the AFC North draft needs. So now let's get to the NFC North, shall we? So Vegas, they like the Lions to win the division, and they're going to try to find some success after losing both their OC and DC after Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn moved on to be head coaches elsewhere. The Vikings, what are they going to do about the quarterback position and Sam Darnold? The Packers, the latest news there, they're shopping Jair Alexander. So is that the direction they're going to go in the draft? And then finally, the Ben Johnson era begins in Chicago. Bears fans hoping that him and Caleb Williams can get the Bears back into the playoffs. And we have BMAC and John Breach back with us here on HQ to discuss, and we're starting with the long shot in the division. That is the Chicago Bears. And gentlemen, they have their quarterback of the future, Ben Johnson, hopefully their head coach of the future. They have some weapons on offense there for Caleb Williams. But Breach, what is the need that is at the top of their list for the draft in your opinion?
Well, I will say that no matter how brilliant of an offense Ben Johnson designs, it is not going to work if Caleb Williams doesn't have any time to throw. And that's kind of what the problem was in Chicago last season. So they need offensive linemen. Caleb Williams got sacked 68 times, which was tied for the third most in NFL history. Probably should be eligible for workers' comp when you're getting beat up like that often. I mean, it was just didn't have any time to throw. So when you look around at what the Bears need to do, whether it's an offensive guard, whether it's an offensive tackle, they do have some options because they're not limited by position. They have several starting offensive linemen from last season hitting free agency. You have Coleman Shelton, Tevin Jenkins, Matt Pryor. So you're going to be able to start from scratch if you're the Bears and kind of pick who you want on the offensive line. And you look at this list, there is a good chance with the Bears picking at 10th overall that one of these guys at the top, whether it's Kelvin Banks Jr., whether it's Will Campbell, will fall down to them. So I will be surprised if the Bears do anything but the offensive line, but I think that's absolutely where they need to start with that 10th overall pick.
I'm right there with you, John. John, you know how bad your offensive line got to be. If you had a mobile quarterback and he was sacked 68 times, we're talking about a quarterback that actually can move and make people miss. And he did that throughout his rookie campaign, but the pocket just collapsed so fast. At times, he just stood there and he got sacked 68 times. He was basically sacked 4 times a ball game. That's what they allowed for the Chicago Bears. So when you look at, yes, having Ben Johnson, one of the more creative offensive minds that we've seen in quite some time, if their offensive line is not together, good luck. It will not be successful. It won't be happy time. So I'm right there with you. The O-line is the only direction to go for the Chicago Bears.
Seems like there might be one direction to go for the Green Bay Packers as well. News coming down within the last 24 hours that the Packers are now shopping their veteran corner in Jair Alexander. So, BMAC, no surprise, a corner is a need for you there.
No question. I mean, when you look at being, 23rd in the first round, picking 23rd for the Green Bay Packers, they will have a nice list of players to pick from to add to their defense at the cornerback position. You talked about Jair Alexander. It's sounding like they're really adamant about moving on from him. So you got to go ahead and replace Jair Alexander. A.Z. Thomas is the name for me. Outstanding career there at Florida State. Went to the Senior Bowl, was outstanding once again in coverage. He was sound throughout the entire week, and he provides the element of size and length to the Green Bay Packers, and that was something that they were missing, especially when they moved on from Rasul Douglas. So being able to add a guy like A.Z. really helps their defense, because I can tell you this much. In the NFC North, when you're seeing Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, J-Mo Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all twice a year, you better have sound guys in the back end that can play sticky coverage and, most importantly, become playmakers for your defense. And AZ will provide that for the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, BMAC. It's not just Jair Alexander who they're looking to move on, but Eric Stokes probably going to leave in free agency. So now you have this huge hole at the cornerback spot. And so that does seem like the route they should go with that 23rd overall pick. And another name out there, Jahdae Barron. We saw the list. of guys they could take. But the other thing is sometimes when you're picking 23rd overall, you don't always have the guy you want fall into your lap. You might circle someone on your draft board, and then all of a sudden they're not there. So it was interesting to hear Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst talk at the Combine and kind of talk about how he wants his team to get better at getting after the quarterback. So maybe getting a pass rusher or a defensive lineman wouldn't be too surprising to see Green Bay go that route. Who knows? If Josh Jacobs is in charge of the draft board, then they might go after a #1 wide receiver, because he was out during Super Bowl week saying that this team needs a top-tier receiver. But I do think cornerback is the route to go for Green Bay.
Well, let's go over to the Vikings, because they still have a lot to figure out in terms of the quarterback. What are they going to do with Sam Darnold? Are they going to hand the keys over to J.J. McCarthy? But Breach, similar to the Packers, the need here is also at corner.
Yeah, you know what? It is. It's cornerback for me, but the Vikings are picking 24th overall, one spot behind the Packers. So the Packers might snatch the guy they want, but if you look at what Minnesota is dealing with right now, Byron Murphy, Stephon Gilmore, Shaq Griffin, all cornerbacks about to hit free agency, so they have to fill those holes, and I think taking a cornerback in the first round would be the smart thing to do for Minnesota.
I'm right there with you. You talked about potential run on cornerbacks. We just had slated the Green Bay Packers selecting A.Z. Thomas. Benjamin Morris could be available for the Minnesota Vikings right behind the Green Bay Packers, and I think that's a quality name to kind of monitor. Season ended prematurely for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. But when you look at what he did throughout his career, they're very, very sticky coverage, plays with great sound eyes, and potentially could be a day one starter for the Minnesota Vikings, to the name that you mentioned in terms of free agency for the Vikings. So all three of those guys that you mentioned, Shaq Griffin, Gilmore, and Byron Murphy, all three will not be back. You know what I mean? So hopefully they get Byron Murphy back, but they will still need some shoes to be filled, and Benjamin could potentially be able to do that.
All right, finally, we're going to talk about the Detroit Lions, a team that was bit hard by the injury bug last season. Now they have to figure out what life is like post Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. What needs do they have to address in the draft, John?
Yeah, you look at what happened to them. Their defense fell apart down the stretch. And yeah, there were injuries that were a part of it, but I think their two biggest issues were they did not get any pass rush after Aiden Hutchinson went down. I mean, he went down in October, and he still led the team in sacks for the entire season. And then you look at their secondary. They're probably going to need some cornerback help with Carlton Davis possibly leaving. So now you think you're Detroit. I don't think you can really go wrong if you take a defense player, whether it is a pass rusher or a cornerback. And the thing is, if you take a pass rusher, you don't have to worry about getting involved in the Myles Garrett sweepstakes. So you don't have to worry about paying a guy like Myles Garrett or giving up the draft compensation they would take to get someone like him. And if they do go with a pass rusher, maybe you get Nick Scourton out of Texas A&M. You have Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State. But picking at 28th overall, getting a corner could be tough, because as we just mentioned, Packers and Vikings also looking at corners. So you might be stuck with like the 8th best corner in the draft at 28th overall.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Defensive line, edge rusher is the way to go when you look at the depth or the lack thereof. Aiden Hutchinson, season-ending injury. Marcus Davenport was dealing with injuries the entire season. You brought in Zadarius Smith. He didn't give you the spark that you needed to have, but finding a way to add more significant depth at that position really helps the entire defense. They addressed the cornerback room last year when you look at getting Terry Arnold and Rakestraw, but you still need to find a way to get quality guys that can put relentless pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And when you talk about this division, once again, John, I do believe the NFC North will be one of the more competitive divisions in the National Football League. So life won't get any easier for the Detroit Lions. So finding a guy like Nick Scourton would definitely do wonders for their defense in terms of 3 levels, helping every level out, not to mention what he can provide in run support.
And just a reminder, we have a full list of those prospect rankings over on CBSSports.com right now. BMAC, Breach, we certainly appreciate it. Talking draft needs for not only the AFC North, but the NFC North as well. Getting a look at the odds to win the Super Bowl among the NFC North teams. Of course, the Lions, that's what Vegas likes, up top at plus 950, followed by the Packers, the Vikings, and the Bears at 41-1.
The 2025 NFL Draft will take place from April 24th through the 27th. Teams looking to fill those holes this offseason. The draft really a perfect opportunity to get some young talent. All week long, we're looking at each division and top draft needs. Today, focused in on the AFC North. Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden and our NFL writer John Breach joining us now on HQ, looking at those draft needs, as I just mentioned, for the AFC North. And we're going to start off with the Browns. There's still questions surrounding Deshaun Watson's health and future. You got to wonder at what point their GM, Andrew Berry, their head coach, Kevin Stefanski, they think maybe we should put a new QB in at the fold. Barry also came out and said that they have zero interest in trading Myles Garrett. That's also a hot topic there. So number 2 pick, BMAC, what do the Browns need to do?
Quarterback. Go find a quarterback. The Browns, they've been in quarterback hell. It feels like forever since I can remember the Cleveland Browns organization. Think about this, guys. Since 2010, 27 different quarterbacks have started for the Cleveland Browns. 27 different quarterbacks. No stability, no structure. They just been playing musical chairs at that position, and the song has never ended. So now you got to go find a franchise guy that you can build around. Now you got to go find a franchise quarterback that could be in your organization for a decade plus. That's what they need to go get. And being in the position they're currently sitting in, John, they have an opportunity to go get that said guy, either if it's Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. So me personally seeing how bad they've been at that position in terms of stability and just structure, go get you a franchise guy, build around him, and just have that stability in the organization, something they haven't been able to do, it seems like forever.
Yeah, BMAC is absolutely correct here. The quarterback position has been an absolute nightmare for the Browns. We've all seen that jersey that has the list of 25 names on it of all the starters since the franchise came back in 1999. And one of the problems is that they just end up blowing these draft picks. I mean, a homeless guy told Jimmy Haslam to pick Johnny Manziel in 2014. That's how you have quarterback problems, because these bizarre situations come up. But now the Browns are in an absolutely perfect spot this year with the number 2 overall pick. As you guys mentioned, look, Andrew Berry has stuck to the fact that, hey, we don't want to trade Myles Garrett. He's a superstar. So I think the Browns are in a good spot because, one, if you love Cam Ward or if you love Shedeur Sanders, you have the number 2 overall pick. So one of those guys will be there for you. Now, if you only love one of them, say Cam Ward, and he goes number 1 overall, well, now you have Abdul Carter there, and that makes it interesting because then maybe you could trade Myles Garrett since you have the top pass rusher in the draft sitting right there for you at number 2 overall. So the Browns absolutely should be looking at quarterback, but I do think it's nice for them to kind of have that safety net of the top pass rusher there if the quarterback they want isn't there at number 2 overall.
Let's talk about their in-state rivals in the Cincinnati Bengals.
Let's talk about them, Jacqueline.
Yeah, let's do it, because they have a lot of stars, if you will, that they want to keep under contract in T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson. Outside of that, too, you have Joe Burrow, who is in the MVP conversation, despite your defense letting up a whole lot of points in every single game. So, Breach, it feels
you don't seem mad about it at all.
Oh, you know I love my Bengals. I lived there for 3 years in Cincinnati.
You cheered there?
I did cheer there. So, Breach, I feel, my heartstrings are pulling here. I want it to work for the Cincinnati Bengals, but you got to address the defense, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have an MVP candidate quarterback and a wide receiver who wins the Triple Crown, you should be in the playoffs at a minimum, probably in the Super Bowl. But no, the Bengals didn't even get to the postseason. So the reason that didn't happen is because the defense was an absolute disaster. This was a team that gave up 34 points or more in 6 games. And this was a team that went 3-4 when their offense scored at least 33 points. Your offense scores 33 points in 7 games. You should go 7-0, not 3-4. So when you look at what the Bengals need to do, the only guy they really have on that front 7 on defense is Trey Hendrickson. Yes, he led the NFL in sacks with 17.5, but the rest of the team only had 18.5 combined. So Trey Hendrickson almost had more by himself than the rest of the entire defense combined. So you look at what Cincinnati needs to do. They either need to add some pass rush, maybe get some help on the defensive line, and maybe you go quarterback. But I think if you're the Bengals right now, you just need to give Trey Hendrickson some help, get some to stop the run, really. So you need those interior defensive line guys. I think someone like Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss could be big if he's there. Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. So if you are the Bengals, focus on that front 7 and specifically that interior defensive line.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. The defensive line is the way to go. Walter Nolan would be an ideal pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. He reminds me a lot of former Bengals great Geno Atkins, a bit undersized, around 6'3", around 300 pounds, but he has a motor. He plays with great hands, and he's not a one-trick pony. He's a guy that can be disruptive in run support, but he also can go out and chase guys and try to make things miserable for guys like a Lamar Jackson, because that's who you're hunting in your division. So go get you some players that can go hunt Lamar Jackson and slow down Derrick Henry. I'm a big fan of Walter Nolan. I think if he's available there at 17, don't waste any time. Go put his name in and make him a Cincinnati Bengal.
All right, pick number 21 belongs to the Steelers. Their owner, Art Rooney, recently stated in his preference to either bring back their two quarterbacks. They have Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Going to bring back one of them at least. Now, regardless of who's under center, B-Mac, you got to expect that Pittsburgh wants some more offensive weapons, correct?
Yes, they need playmakers. Last year, the only playmaker was George Pickens. And when he wasn't involved, he didn't have any playmaking ability at all on the offensive side. So at the 21st pick, go get you a playmaker. And if this player is available, John Breach, get your popcorn ready. Even though you and Jacqueline, oddly enough, are Cincinnati Bengals fans, you might not like this pick. Ashton Genty at 21. One thing I know about the Pittsburgh Steelers, they do not mind investing first-round draft picks in offensive line, D-line, linebackers, or running backs. And you look at Najee Harris, we don't know if he will return for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They declined to pick up his fifth-year option. And if Ashton happens to fall to them at 21, you go make this selection. He will be a bona fide playmaker for their offense. You look at what the Pittsburgh Steelers have done in years past in the draft. They address the offensive line. The best way to get the most out of those offensive linemen you've added to your team, go get them a guy that can run the football. And he is the best running back available in the draft.
Yeah, I do absolutely agree with B-Mac there. If Ashton Genty is on the board, then the Steelers should absolutely draft him. But the Steelers are in a unique position because they don't have necessarily a huge need. They probably need a number 2 wide receiver behind George Pickens, a running back to pair with Jaylen Warren, and if it is Genty, he would instantly become the number 1 guy there. Maybe some help on the offensive line, but I think they could also stand to add some depth on defense. And if there's one thing we haven't seen the Steelers do over the past 5 years, it's use a first-round pick on a defensive player, which I'm sure kind of nags at Mike Tomlin because he's a defensive-minded guy. He would love to add some talent in the first round. So the Steelers have a ton of options here. I think maybe beefing up the defensive line would help. We mentioned that with the Bengals, so you have kind of a similar list of guys like Walter Nolan or Shamar Stewart or Kenneth Grant. So you have guys that are going to be available. But yeah, I would go with the defensive side of the ball. Unless Ashton Genty's there, then absolutely take him.
B-Mac, I have to let you know, my dad is from West Mifflin, so I do have love for the Steelers as well. I've had my fair share of Permane Brothers sandwiches.
Teams.
It's not my team. I'm just saying, like, I have family from
Jacqueline,
there.
you got to pick one.
No.
You got to pick one.
So guys, I know the Venn diagram of, like, folks that have love for the Bengals and the Steelers is only me in the middle of the circle there. But hey, I'm in it. Oh, well. Let's talk about the Ravens because it is always all about the postseason, right? Lamar Jackson, he's, a 2-time MVP, but it just feels like they cannot get over the hump. They've been to one AFC title game in the Lamar Jackson era. So, Breach, who can they target in this draft to finally get over the hump, get back to a Super Bowl, win another Super Bowl maybe?
Hey, look, if you're the Baltimore Ravens, your bread and butter is Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry. So what can you do to help them? Well, you can draft an offensive lineman. You really look at where Baltimore is and what their situation is right now. Ronnie Stanley could leave in free agency. I know the Ravens would probably like to keep him, but if the money gets too high and he walks away, now you absolutely need a left tackle. So I think that's where the Ravens need to start looking. That's kind of what they need to be focusing on as they head into the NFL draft. And when you look at the tackles who might be there when the Ravens pick 27th overall, well, you see that list. They're not going to have any shot at someone like Kelvin Banks, but there are players who could be there. I think Josh Simmons from Ohio State is a great example. He's been dealing with a patellar injury that he had surgery on in October, so maybe his stock falls a little, and maybe he falls down to that 27th spot. Josh Connerly Jr. out of Oregon would be another solid pick for the Ravens, so I think they need to keep their eye on left tackle. But if there is not a guy that they like there, you could also go to the secondary because the Ravens did give up the second most passing yards in the NFL during the 2024 season, so they could definitely use some help there. So I'd go left tackle, secondary is my two biggest needs if I'm Baltimore.
For me, I go edge rusher. When you're in a conference that have quarterbacks like Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes, and Josh Allen, I need to go find players who look like what they hunt. And James Pierce Jr. is that guy. When you look at Kyle Van Noy, had an outstanding year, double-digit sacks. He's in the final year of his contract, John, and he's 33 years old. So you need to go add some more depth that can go put pressure on those quarterbacks that I mentioned. Because if you have any aspirations of having a successful season, and most importantly, trying to get to another Super Bowl, you got to go find guys that can go hunt down Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes, because that's the name of the game right now. And James Pierce had an outstanding career there at Tennessee in Knoxville. He does a great job in being relentless. He has a nice bend, a dip, nice hand placement as well, and a big-time motor. And I'm hearing potentially he goes to Indy and run a high 4.5. So if he puts down that type of athleticism, you better believe he will open a lot of eyes out in Indy. So if he's available for the Baltimore Ravens, go ahead and continue to add another athletic edge rusher to your defense.
BMAC, John, don't go anywhere. We got much more coming from the two of you as we take a look at the odds to win the Super Bowl. Now, this is just the AFC North teams. The Ravens have the shortest odds at plus 700. Bengals at 19-1. The Steelers plus 7,500. The Browns, well, they are a long shot.
Yes, to say the least.